Mike and I had pitched our tent deep in the woods near Glacier Creek, thinking we were smart for going off trail, far from tourists. The air was dead still, no wind, no bugs, just an eerie silence that felt wrong. Around 3 a.m., I woke up to the sound of heavy breathing. Outside the tent, not human, not clothes, something deeper, thicker. I thought Mike was snoring until I heard the crunching of leaves, slow and steady, like something circling us. I held my breath, trying to listen, and then I heard it's something pawing at the zipper. Not tugging, not clawing, testing it. That's when I knew this wasn't some raccoon or curious deer. I reached for the flashlight, but couldn't find it in the dark. And then it happened. The tent ripped open like paper, and all I saw was black fur and the gleam of two eyes reflecting what little moonlight there was. Mike screamed, and I froze. A massive black bear had torn its way in and was now half inside the tent, sniffing around like it owned the place. It went straight for the cooler we stupidly left near our sleeping bags, knocked it aside, and swiped at the gear. One claw tore through the side of my bag, inches from my leg. Mike dove out the back flap, yelling for me to move, and somehow, I did barefoot, panicked, crashing into the forest like prey. We spent the rest of the night hiding behind a log, heartbeats louder than the wind, listening as the bear destroyed everything we had back at camp. When we returned at dawn, the tent was shredded, the cooler scattered in pieces, and claw marks slashed across our backpacks. A ranger later told us the bear was known in the area and had likely smelled our food from miles away. He said we were lucky. I didn't feel lucky, I felt haunted. That night changed how I look at the woods. Now, every snap of a twig in the dark makes my heart stop. They always say if a bear attacks, play dead, but no one tells you what to do when it doesn't work. And for Ellie, the night in Alaska proved the rule wasn't a guarantee. She was hiking solo, experienced, careful, and carrying bear spray, but the trail had turned muddy and silent, and by the time she realized the dense shrubs weren't rustling from the wind, it was too late. A massive grizzly stepped onto the path ahead, just 20 feet away. She froze. The bear stared, then charged. An instinct took over. She dropped to the ground, curled up tight, covered her neck, and held her breath, just like the guidelines said. The bear stopped, sniffed, and for a second, it seemed to work. But then it pawed at her leg, hard, then again, and suddenly it was on top of her, pressing its full weight into her back like it was testing if she was truly lifeless. She didn't move, even as a tooth grazed her shoulder. But when it started tearing into her backpack, something ripped loud enough to startle them both. Ellie gasped from the shock, and that tiny sound broke the illusion. The bear turned aggressive instantly, slamming its paw into her side and dragging her a few feet off the trail like a rag doll. She couldn't scream. She just shut her eyes and waited to die until a gunshot cracked through the trees. A group of nearby hikers had seen the commotion and fired into the air, scaring the bear off long enough for them to pull her away. She survived with broken ribs, torn muscle, and deep scars, but the worst scar, she said later, was knowing that even when you follow every rule, nature doesn't always follow back. Since then, she's never hiked alone, never trusted silence, and never believed the bear will just leave you alone if you play dead. He was just looking for firewood, nothing far, nothing risky. Just a few dry branches to keep the flames going until morning. But the second Jason stepped into that clearing, everything inside him screamed to stop. The forest had been quiet all evening, almost unnaturally so. But out there, in that patch of moonlit space, it was like sound itself had vanished. No wind, no leaves, just his breath and the crunch beneath his boots. At first, he didn't see it, just a strange shape across the clearing, like a stump that didn't belong. Then it moved, just a twitch, a ripple of muscle under fur. Jason's breath caught in his throat. It wasn't a stump, it was a bear. Not black, not small, this thing was massive, a full-grown grizzly, and it was already staring at him. His hands went cold instantly. He didn't move, didn't blink. Every memory of every bear safety video he'd ever watched flashed in his brain at once. Dante, run. Don't make eye contact. Speak softly. Back away. But Jason couldn't speak, couldn't move. The bear rose slightly, just enough to stretch its neck and sniff the air like it already knew what he was. Then it stepped forward. One paw. Two. It wasn't charging, it was just walking, slowly, as if it had all the time in the world to decide what to do with him. Jason took one shaky step backward, nearly tripped over a root, and knew that if he fell, he was done. He kept backing up, praying the bear would lose interest. But it kept following, slow, calm, deliberate. When Jason finally reached the tree line, he wanted to run, but knew better. Instead, he ducked behind a tree, heartbeat hammering, as the bear kept moving forward into the clearing like it was following his scent. It couldn't quite place. Then something snapped behind Jason, a dry branch under a foot, not his. He turned just enough to see a second figure, another camper from their group, coming to check on him. She saw the bear and froze, too. For one breathless moment, all three of them, the bear, Jason, and Emily, stood completely still, locked in a triangle of fear. Then the bear let out a low, guttural growl and turned sharply toward her. Jason did the only thing he could think of. He shouted, waved his arms, and threw the bundle of sticks he'd gathered. The noise startled the bear just enough to make it pause. Emily screamed. Jason grabbed her arm, and they both bolted through the trees as the bear reared up and roared behind them. They didn't stop running until they hit the edge of the road, a half-mile downhill, lungs burning, legs shaking. When they finally looked back, the bear was gone, but that feeling, that primal silence in the clearing, stayed with Jason for weeks. He never forgot how it felt to be watched by something that powerful, that calm, that close and completely out of control. We thought we'd left the danger behind when we drove out of the woods, but that night proved the terrifying truth: sometimes the wild follows you home. After a weekend camping trip in the Smoky Mountains, my friends and I packed up and headed back to our rental cabin just a few miles outside the park boundary, a cozy frame buried in the trees. We were laughing about the trip, tired, maybe a little smug about how smoothly it had gone. We'd seen no bears, just a few deer, and assumed the horror stories didn't apply to people like us. We grilled outside that evening, left a few things on the deck without thinking, leftovers and foil, a garbage bag tucked in the corner. It wasn't even dark yet when we heard the first heavy footfall on the gravel path. At first, we thought it was one of us messing around until we looked out and saw it, a black bear, big, silent, and already halfway up the steps to the porch. For a second, we all just stood there, staring. Through the sliding glass door, the bear didn't hesitate. It sniffed the grill, pawed the bag, and then nudged the door with its nose. We scrambled back, hearts racing, adrenaline crashing into us like a wave. It started pressing its weight against the glass, testing it, like it knew this barrier was the only thing between it and dinner. My friend Jess grabbed a pan and started banging it near the kitchen window, trying to scare it off, but the bear didn't flinch. It turned slowly, looked straight at her through the glass, and kept pushing. The door flexed with each shove, the lock barely holding. Someone finally had the sense to hit the car alarm on the key fob. The blaring sound outside startled it enough to make it pause but not leave. It backed off the porch, circled the cabin once, then came around the side where the bedrooms were. We moved from room to room, tracking it like we were being hunted. It tapped on a window with its paw, not aggressively, just enough to send chills down our spines. For the next hour, it paced the property. We couldn't leave. We couldn't sleep. It was like being under siege, trapped in a home that suddenly felt like a glass box. Eventually, around 3 a.m., it vanished into the trees. But none of us slept at night, and in the morning, we found deep claw marks along the frame of the back door and fur stuck to the wood. The trash was torn open. Our shoes, which we'd left on the porch, were shredded and dragged down the trail. That night changed how I see the line between civilization and wilderness. I used to think nature stayed where it belonged, out there, away from people. But now I know, if it wants to come closer, it will. And once it finds you, it doesn't always leave. We thought it was just raccoons at first, those sounds near the edge of camp, the rustling, The low grunts, but when we peeked through the trees, what we saw froze the blood in our veins. A huge brown bear, easily 600 pounds, silently dragging our cooler away like it was nothing but a lunchbox. It didn't thrash, didn't roar, it moved with this terrifying purpose, never breaking eye contact as it looked toward our tent, like it knew exactly where we were. The cooler was heavy, full of meat, drinks, snacks, but the bear gripped it in its jaws and yanked it 20 feet into the woods without effort. We stayed dead quiet, 4 of us crammed inside the tent, holding our breath. Then came the mistake. Jason whispered, "It's leaving," and unzipped the tent just enough to peek out. The sound was small, but it caught the bear's attention. It dropped the cooler, lifted its nose, and turned, slowly, deliberately, right toward us. We backed away from the flap, tried to stay calm, but the silence outside was unbearable until suddenly it wasn't. The bear charged the tent in complete silence, tearing through nylon like it wasn't even there. We screamed. It was chaos. One of us dove out the side while another froze in place. I saw claws swipe past my leg and heard someone yell in pain. It wasn't just after food anymore, it was in the middle of us, tearing through sleeping bags, biting through gear, sending the stove flying. Somehow, we all made it out, scattered into the trees barefoot, bleeding, hiding behind anything we could find. The bear didn't leave for another 10 minutes. It didn't need to. By the time it wandered off, it had destroyed everything: tent, clothes, food, even the metal frame of the cooler was crushed. When the rangers arrived the next day, they found the prints, the claw marks, and what was left of our gear, and told us straight. The bear had been spotted multiple times raiding camps in the area, and it had lost its fear of humans. They said we were lucky to be alive, but it didn't feel like luck. It felt like we had been hunted. Even now, I can't sleep in a tent without imagining that silence the moment the woods go still, and something massive is already watching you from the dark. We always thought bears avoided people. That night proved they don't always follow the rules, especially when they're hungry.